This is Grant Swartzwelder. I'm going to be your host today for the Grown Up Table, where we have conversations on life and character. Let's set the table today. Sleep is so important for so many reasons. It really helps with health. It helps, they say, with beauty. Obviously, I haven't been getting enough sleep from that standpoint. But probably one of the things that you really don't think about is the effect that sleep has on relationships. And so that's something we're going to talk about today. We treat sleep deprivation as kind of a badge of honor, but what it could be doing is really hurting your relationship or hurting your marriage. And so today we have, I think, a phenomenal guest to talk about that topic, to really explore what sleeping in separate beds is all about, whether that is a positive or a negative, or as she calls it, sleep divorce. So today we have Katrina Watland, who has vast experience in the counseling area. She has a degree from Texas Tech, a degree from University of Texas, Arlington. There are two things that really impress me about Katrina. One is that she has a huge amount of experience counseling women through the Women's Center, a host of experience with that. And then in reading her background, it also says that she knows how to kickbox. And so all this time I've been very kind of mean to you, but I didn't realize you could kick my ass if I pushed the limit. So now that I know that, I will try to be much more polite today, and I think it'll go well, and I will be able to go home with my ego still intact, or at least that's the goal that I have. Is that fair enough, Katrina?
Yes, I don't think you need to be worried.
Okay, well, I don't know. It wouldn't be the first time a woman's kicked my ass. So but that's a whole nother podcast that shall go.
Indeed.
Very kind of controversial type phraseology,
Yep.
but what is sleep divorce?
Yes, so sleep divorce is really at its most basic definition just couples choosing separate sleeping arrangements. And so we can dig into that a little bit more and possibly sleep divorce. I like to use that terminology. It's a little bit provocative, but I think it does pique people's
Sure.
curiosity because there are other ways of phrasing that too. Sleep separation, sleepcation. That one sounds kind of nice.
Yeah, that is.
I have to check my notes for, peaceful bedtime arrangement.
Oh, that sounds
PBA. Yeah, it's a very sort of soothing.
yes.
But I think sleep divorce is something that just creates a little bit of curiosity. And what is this all about? It really is just couples choosing to sleep in separate beds, separate rooms usually. And that can happen in a variety of ways. But
Okay.
really at its basis, that's what it is, just sleeping separately.
There seems like there's a stigma associated with sleeping in separate beds, that
Mhm.
your relationship is on the rocks, you're not emotionally attached. Is that the case?
I think that that stigma is very real.
Sure.
Absolutely. The two things that I think come up for people when they first hear sleep divorce or hear maybe a couple say, well, we don't sleep in the same bed or we don't sleep in the same room, which is usually the case, not just a separate bed, but it's usually in a separate room. Two things I think come up for people. They think something's wrong with the relationship and there's going to be no sexual intimacy. And both of those things are false. And I would say not only false, but I think quite the opposite tends to be true for couples who've decided to sleep separately and protect their sleep and all the great benefits that come with getting really, really good sleep. So the stigma is there. And I think people do seem really surprised when you bring up the topic. I read a statistic that about 1/3 of couples nowadays are sleep divorced or sleeping separately.
Okay.
And so that's actually, I think
That's
that's quite a big
bit, yeah.
number.
I would not have expected
Especially
that.
because people don't talk about it. It does feel, I think, like you said, that stigma. There's some stigma there, so people don't talk about it, which is why I love that we're doing this podcast, because I think that there can be some real benefits for couples, and I think there can be some real relief for couples to hear that both of those things are not true. Neither of those things are true. Doesn't mean the relationship's in trouble. It doesn't mean you're going to lose sexual intimacy.
Do you think, kind of laying the groundwork, kind of going back one step and then coming
Mhm.
forward, do you think culture or history has made that stigma made it where you need to sleep in the same bed? Because you look back
Mhm.
now, this might have been just because of TV, but I remember Dick Van Dyke, that they had separate beds,
Yep.
and a lot of folks back then. And then you read, and back in the medieval times, they had separate bedrooms. And so it's almost like history would be that folks had separate beds or separate bedrooms, and it's only been recently, maybe last 30, 40 years,
Mhm.
that it's been more of the quote norm that that you would sleep in the same bed or the
Mhm.
same bedroom.
Yep. I think so. I looked into this a little bit because I thought you might ask.
Uh,
And so, historically, when you think many, many years ago, families would sleep in the same bed, right? But this was a
sure.
function of safety and warmth. So people were sleeping in a familial bed. Sleeping had nothing to do with privacy and nothing to do with sexual intimacy either. So that was just a function of practicality and of staying warm, staying safe. People sleeping all in the same bed together. 18th, 19th centuries, wealthier households then had separate bedrooms. That was almost more of a status symbol, right? I have more than one bedroom, and couples would sleep apart. And then the TV shows in the 50s, that wasn't just for TV. I think I always thought that was just for TV because
Right.
back then we didn't want to show couples in the same bed. That's how people slept. I think until around the 50s, they slept most often in separate beds. It might have been in the same bedroom, but separate beds. And some of that was, I think, for health reasons. People talked about that being for health reasons. And then really after about the 50s, it became the cultural norm, as you said, to sleep together, and that was it was really a symbol of connectedness and intimacy, and that was the way that we were supposed to sleep if we were a married couple or coupled, long-term couple, and that would be in a queen bed and later a king bed, and probably now these California king
There you
beds.
go. So
They got
you're
bigger and
bigger,
bigger.
so you
Yeah.
can sleep further
Maybe
away
exactly
from.
until
So
now
it's
we've realized, well, you can just sleep in separate rooms again. It's really
exactly. It's
okay.
so big because you can't fit it in the
Yep.
room there.
Right,
So it's
right.
well, another foundational item let's discuss is that kind of the importance of sleep,
Mm,
because I
yes.
think it helps from a health standpoint, but it also, well, for yourself, but also for your mate.
Yep. Yep. Yeah, and uh, this is one of the reasons I really am so glad that we're talking about this topic because I've always been such a supporter of everybody getting good sleep. I always wanted my kids to have really good sleep. I protected that fiercely in my own sleep. And so it's so important that at all ages and stages, we get enough sleep. And adults should be getting, I mean, research sort of shows 7 hours or more. I'd say most people need more than 7 hours, but at a
Right.
minimum, 7 hours a night, for good sleep, and most adults, I would say, are not getting that, most adults
Mhm.
in the US. So
And it does seem like yeah, sleep controls one third of your day,
mhm,
but you could argue that it really controls the whole day,
yep,
because if you don't get the rest, you don't get the sleep, then changes your mood,
right,
changes your sharpness.
right.
So so we can talk about the 7 or 8 hours, but quite honestly, it's a whole 24 hours.
Yes, that's a great point. And conversely, if you've had a great night's sleep, you know how that is, and you wake up and you think you just can kind of own the day and your work just is better. You feel better, you're happier. There's so much that benefits you when you get a good night's sleep. And for adults or for people who aren't getting enough sleep, there's some real health effects to that, both mentally,
Right?
increased depression rates, increased anxiety if you're not getting enough sleep. There's some real physical health issues as well
It's tied to weight. Uh,
absolutely, yep. Um, and so I think I even read diabetes. I can't explain that, but I saw that somewhere.
it sounds like an interesting point.
Yeah,
So good.
something. So I'm just throwing that out there. But there are some really bad effects of not getting enough sleep. And when you sleep in a bed with someone else, there's a high likelihood that you're not going to get great sleep.
That Let's talk about kind of part back to that stigma that we
Hmm.
talked about.
Hmm.
If we don't sleep together, does that mean we're drifting away from each other? Or does that potentially create that kind of
Hmm.
distance?
I think that that is a real fear for couples
Sure.
who that I've worked with who've then they're working through the process. Should we do this? Because they're pretty miserable sleeping in the same bed. And that could be for a lot of reasons. So maybe one of the partners snores, or maybe
Right.
both. Maybe one really likes the room much colder than the other,
Yep.
darker than the other. Somebody needs, no sounds, but the other person is coming in after the first one's gone to bed or getting up early. Timing is different. Somebody's getting up to go to the bathroom. I mean, there's just so many reasons why it disrupts your sleep. And so even if the fear is, well, we're losing touch with each other, we're losing intimacy, I say I think it's very much the opposite because if your partner has been snoring and you didn't sleep very well, how do you wake up? Pretty
Right.
cranky.
Yep.
You might even be kind of pissed at that person. It's not their fault that they're snoring, but you're still kind of irritated and
It would
mad.
still mess up your sleep.
Right.
Sure.
And so without that good sleep, it's hard to be present. It's hard to be your best in the relationship. So then you wake up cranky at your partner. Well, there's not going to be any intimacy happening at that point,
No.
right?
Just
Because you're
argument.
mad.
Yes.
You started your day mad. Also, you started your day tired and cranky. And so it's not good for the other parts of your life either. And so I think that often it is the opposite of what we fear, which is we're going to lose touch. And just to talk about sex as well, because I think that's one of the things couples fear too if they sleep apart, but these arrangements can look very different for different people. So sometimes people are sleep divorced or sleep separated just on weeknights. So just the days that next day they have to get up and go to work. Or maybe just when there's a stressful period at work or in their personal life and they just really need to protect some sleep. So maybe you're sleeping in the same
Or
bed on
someone's getting up
weekends.
early because they have to
Yes.
go to work
Yep. Yep. Or
or
someone
take
has
care of a kid or whatever.
exactly.
Yeah.
Yeah, you have young kids, and that's a time when a lot of couples find it helpful to sleep apart. And whoever's taking the night shift when a kid's waking up, right? So that you're not disrupting each other the whole night. So, yes, lots of reasons like that, that the sleeping apart can be beneficial without losing that connection and intimacy because I think you're just feeling better, you're happier, you're not annoyed at your partner. Well, you might be annoyed at your partner for something else,
Yes.
but you're not annoyed at your partner because they've interrupted your sleep. And then you're just better for all the things that are happening in your day. And the sexual intimacy can happen, you can start out in the same bed together. And then before you go to sleep, you can separate into rooms, right? Or you can become a little more creative in your
Doesn't
intimacy.
that though kind of create a structure that you have to go through to have that intimacy that it's like, okay, we will go to bed at 10, we will have sex, and
and
then
then and then sleep
off you
apart.
go to your
Yeah.
other room.
Well,
It's
I don't know if it has to be scheduled, but it could be that if the couple really feels like they wanna cuddle in bed, they might do that. But I think what it leads to as well is a little more just a more creative, sex life because it doesn't have to be in bed at a prescribed time. And if you're feeling awake and energized, some exciting things might be able to happen at a random time of day,
and a random place, it
and a
sounds
random
like.
place.
Okay.
Exactly. So, not to get too far into those
Yes.
details, but I
I
think
know, we
that
don't wanna have to start bleeping the stuff
yes, or
out,
make this
so
like an R-rated
yeah, no,
podcast. This
this
should
is
be
meant to be a little
family
family friendly.
friendly-ish.
Yes.
But those things are important, right? Those are all those things. Sex is important to our mental health and our physical health and our well-being and our happiness as a couple. So it is important to mention that. And I really do believe in the couples that I've worked with on this, I think have found that the relationship becomes happier, maybe easier in some ways too, because you're both getting good sleep or as good of sleep as you can. And you can feel more connected, I think. And again, sleep divorce or sleep separation doesn't mean that you never sleep in the same bed. It could be if you really have trouble sleeping, but it can mean that there are just periods where you don't sleep in the same bed.
And I would think generally this was in a separate room,
Yes.
because if you have light sensitivity
Yep.
or noise
Yep.
sensitivity, being in the twin bed next to your
Right.
twin bed doesn't really. So
Right.
you're talking completely separate rooms.
bedrooms. Yes, I think, and I was going to say I don't really know it. I haven't spoken or worked with anyone who slept in just separate beds, but that was what we saw on the TV shows, right?
Mhm.
So, but you're right. I think to really be effective, separate rooms, and it really is the best because then you are eliminating all the other things that you might have a different preference for when you sleep.
Mhm.
Like for example, I can sleep with it being fairly light, but I can't sleep when there's sounds. So I like to sleep with a sound machine. Well, maybe if you have a partner, that partner might not like having a sound
Mhm.
machine. So it just, I think it's also, um, yeah, it's just, you're really helping protect your partner's sleep as well as your own.
But as a guy, I'm a big fan of figuring out who's at fault.
Oh, yes, that's
And,
really important in a relationship.
yes,
Yes, that's a
it's,
really good way to.
this will make the sleep stuff
Yeah.
seem minor compared to this. So, yeah, the guy normally is the one that snores. Sometimes
Hmm.
women do. But don't you think it's really because the woman is just too sensitive to the
To the
sound
sound.
and to the light? And wouldn't you think
Yes.
that this is more of a
It's
female issue
all the woman's
than
fault. I think
okay.
that's right.
Thank you. It's
No, but
no,
uh,
no.
but
Okay,
actually
please
though, but I know
please
you jest, right?
well,
Sort of.
you hope I jest
But
for my
but this
wife's sake, but
this will bring up another topic too, which is a female issue, which is perimenopause, which is when a
ooh,
lot of sleep issues arise for women. So we
yes.
could, in that context, we could probably say that is a little more on the woman. And so, and there you get into things like the room temperature and stuff
Yeah.
like that. And so, if you are partnered with a woman who's in the age of perimenopause, which can last for many, many years, sleep divorce might be a really good idea.
Right.
Again, for both parties. So, yeah, maybe right there we could say that's mostly on
Yeah,
the
well,
woman.
and for the reputation for my family and my
Yes.
wife, I will say I was just joshing.
Yes.
And but it is, whether it's snoring, whether it's sound sensitivity, whether it's needing it completely
Hmm.
dark, it's a light sensitivity. It six and one half
Yep.
dozen. At the end of the
Yep.
time, it's causing an issue there.
Right. Right.
So it's how do you manage through
Yep.
that?
Yep.
So it's well, so you have these issues. You've had these issues for a while. You're irritated at your spouse. How do you bring it up? How do you confront it? How do you hint at
Hmm.
it?
Hmm.
Because
Yep.
back to the stigma
Yep.
point, seems like I don't really want to bring that up because
Hmm.
that's going to hint that sleep divorce is moving to a real divorce.
Hmm.
So
Yeah.
how do talk to my spouse? And I guess the first thing is not to blame the other person based
Right.
on your
Yes.
reaction
Right.
just a
Right.
second ago.
Exactly.
Okay,
Do not blame the other person. It's like any good communication. You want to start from that I perspective. So I am struggling with sleep, something along those lines. But I think even before that, I would share this podcast with them. Wouldn't you think that would be a
I
great
think
starting
this is
point?
so the whole neighborhood should watch this and then
Right.
move to a separate
Exactly.
bedroom.
Yes. If you listen to this podcast, share this podcast, or honestly, you could really just say, "Hey, I just listened to this podcast
Right.
about this crazy idea called sleep divorce or sleep separation, and this is what some couples are doing." And I think you would want to reassure your partner this doesn't have anything to do with our relationship being in trouble. And like we've talked about here, I think it can be something that can really benefit our relationship.
And it
And
does seem like this is becoming more common, and like
mhm,
you said,
mhm.
upwards to a
A
third
third?
already do it.
Mhm.
So you probably have a lot of friends that are already doing this, but
But
there's
they don't
between
talk
the
about it.
podcast, between studies, there's a lot of information
Mhm.
out there for this
Yep,
type so that you can kind of slide that in over to your spouse to
yep.
let them read or see or something like that.
Yes, yep. Yeah, and again, I think coming from that point of this would be I believe would be beneficial for our relationship. Now, I do wanna say a word about not needing to sleep in separate rooms. Of course, a lot of couples are not having issues sleeping. So this isn't a recommendation for
Yeah.
everybody. So if you are in a relationship where you both sleep fine in the bed together, or the sleep disruption, you seem to manage it okay, then there's no reason to say, oh, we should be sleep divorced. That's better than anything else. So just a word about that. If you're both sleeping fine together and managing the day and you're not irritated at your spouse because they're snoring, then of course stay in the same bed. Um, and and also not everybody has the luxury of having another extra bedroom
Right.
somewhere. So we need to mention that too. So then there might need to be something else creatively. Is there another place in the house where they could sleep that isn't maybe a bedroom, but that's still quiet or something like that? So that's another thing to think about too. Not everybody has the luxury of having an extra bedroom, but
Now you talk about I know your history has been, with counseling of humans,
mhm.
but when I think about sleep divorce, I also wonder about divorcing your animals because having the dogs in the bed and what that does for your sleep
Yes.
and, intimacy and, should you also just divorce the dogs?
Well, that's a good question, and I had not thought of that until you just said it, because when I've had pets or dogs, I've never had them in the room. Probably goes back to what I said, I've always fiercely protected my sleep and the sleep of anybody in my household. So, I
And
had not thought
I'll be
about it.
honest that we let them sleep with us,
Yeah.
and I wake up with a paw
Yep.
in the neck or
Yeah.
on the side or someone slamming up against me,
Yep.
and it's like, you know, so it's not my wife causing the
Right.
lack of sleep, it's those
The dogs.
stupid dogs.
Well, here's the thing, people are fiercely loyal to their pets, so I'm almost afraid to say this because there probably would be no hate mail about saying sleep separately from your spouse, but I bet I could get hate mail for saying sleep separately from your pet.
And if I brought this up to my wife, the dogs would probably stay in the
Stay and you
bed
would
and I
go.
would go.
I think that might
And
be
that would
true.
to learn the pecking order would
Yep.
probably be very, very hurtful to
Yes.
my ego.
Yes.
So it's
So, well, this brings up something that I honestly had not thought about before, but my first reaction would be to say, absolutely, don't have the pet sleep in the bed either, because they're probably, I don't they make a lot of noise? And like you said, you get a
they,
paw in the neck, or maybe they need to get up and go to the bathroom. And so, if that is
it
something that
is
is
kind of a
causing a
race as
sleep
to how many times they have to go to the bathroom versus how many
versus,
times I have to go.
exactly.
And it's a real close
Yep.
race every
Yeah.
night.
Yeah, so I would think it's like anything in creating good sleep hygiene for yourself. Anything that is a sleep disturbance, I think it would be great if you could remove that for most nights. So, I would just say, yes, that would be wonderful if you could also have your pets sleep in a separate room or a separate space or a bed somewhere
And
else.
that's going to be a bigger challenge than
Yeah.
just moving the human
I
over.
think so. I think we've touched on a whole new topic that might need to be explored in greater
You never
depth.
thought sleep divorce would include
I
animals, but I
never
think,
never
but
did.
it all speaks to
Yep.
your ability to get a good night's
Yep.
sleep. So so looking at your situation, trying to, let's kind of give an overview of
Mhm.
what those, you've got to kind of figure out what's best for you and how that's defined. And then how do you, kind of flow through that to take the right steps?
You mean as far as just with your partner? Like,
Yes,
yeah.
we're going to put the dogs
Yep.
over on the side
This is
and
what
go
we're gonna
back to the
do.
human part.
Right. Yeah, I think it's a little bit of a sit down at the table and let's have a negotiation of what is this gonna look like? And maybe starting with, first of all, what are the sleep barriers? What are the things that are creating an issue for me and then for you? And once you kind of have those on the table, then you can look at what would make sense to do, and that might be sleep separation. And then I think that the discussion could continue. Does that mean every night? Does that mean weeknights? What makes sense for the couple? And like you touched on earlier, maybe based on work schedules, it makes sense for weeknights to have separate bedrooms, and then weekends and holidays or times when you could sleep in a little later. So I think really it is a sitting down at the table and negotiating what makes sense for
Like
that
so many
particular
things,
couple.
just the communication that goes
Exactly.
back and
Yep.
forth on
And
that.
and again, that's staying very true to like I need this, or I'm experiencing this. Not you keep me up at night because you are snoring. That doesn't land very well, right? That
No.
doesn't, even me saying it, I feel like I say it kind of
Yeah. If you
mean
present
like.
it a certain way, it seems like there's a decent chance the other party
Yes.
probably has some of those same exact
Yes.
feelings,
Yes.
and it might open the door to allow you to
Mhm.
have that open
Yep,
dialogue to
yep.
discuss it, and it might be a relief to the other side.
I think oftentimes it is, and maybe if you can listen to this podcast or do a little research on your own and can reassure each other that this does not mean the relationship's in trouble. This does not mean that we're never gonna be intimate. This doesn't mean the things that maybe come up from a societal standpoint of what might be wrong if you're not sleeping in the same bed, but instead focus on what could really be right with having some separate sleeping arrangements so that the relationship can be better and just healthier and happier, I think, for a lot of couples who decide to do this.
Katrina, I really appreciate your time talking about this. Katrina Watland is the founder and of TrueNorth, which is a counseling center up in the Plano,
Frisco?
Frisco
Yeah.
area. Uh, as you can tell, just a wealth of knowledge, compassion, wonderful on these type topics. She spoke on a previous episode, so please go look at that to get another idea of the type of thought and care that Katrina can provide. So, as you see here, sleep isn't just a function. It really addresses kind of how you feel, your mental capability. And if you don't really take care of that, it really can have a drastic effect on you as an individual, but also your relationships. While this sounds kind of drastic to sleep divorce, to move into a separate bedroom, as you've just heard, a lot of people do this and it might be the right fit for you. But explore it, see the benefits. If it's for you, try that out. Hopefully, you've enjoyed this episode of the Grown Up Table and maybe have learned something different, thought about something different. That's the purpose of this. And if you did, please share this with other people, either on YouTube or wherever you get your podcasts. Thank you.